So we come to the last section of this reading, and I wanted to pause here and give it a little more time, give it its own video. It begins on page 68. This is the section called Necessity's Despair as to Lack Possibility. This general section is about these so-called imbalances in the self between the different aspects of our humanity and how we can... I tend to think that the sort of taxonomy or the categorization of these different forms of despair in this section is kind of a joke. That is, take it seriously. There can be this kind of, I don't know, this inventory of different types of despair. And I think that what he gets to here in this form of despair, necessity lacking possibility, we're really getting down to some serious business in Kierkegaard. And one of the clues to that is that in this section, in my reading, I hope I'm not wrong, a concept is introduced here which is incredibly important for Kierkegaard, and that is faith. And that experience of faith is, I would say, at the heart of this book. So necessity's despair is to lack possibility. What does that mean? And the top of page 68, he says, if one wants to compare running astray in possibility, which was the earlier form of despair, with a child's use of vowels, then lacking possibility is like being dumb, not being able to speak. The necessary is as though there were only consonants, but to utter them there has to be possibility. This is a great metaphor, I think, using the phenomenon of speech as a way of characterizing these different forms of despair. If we're running astray in possibility, we have only vowels, which are sounds without limits. And for speech to be coherent, sounds need limits. They need to be concrete in that way. They need to have the vowel, which is a possibility, but they also need limits, the consonants, to give them the necessary to make them coherent speech. But if you're in the despair of necessity lacking possibility, you have only consonants, which means that you're sort of strangled. You think of trying to speak in only consonants. That is, you lack freedom, you lack possibility, you lack hope. So, what is the reality of this situation to lack possibility? It's being stuck. It's being in a hopeless situation. It is being bound. It is being smothered. It is being frozen. It is being stuck. It's a form of despair. And for Kierkegaard, the main thing is, how do we respond in those situations, in those hopeless situations? He says, in the third paragraph, page 68, the decisive thing is, for God, everything is possible. This is eternally true and therefore true every moment. People no doubt say this in the ordinary way of things, and this is how one ordinarily puts it. But the decisive moment only comes when man is brought to the utmost extremity, where in human terms there is no possibility. I mean, people say, oh, for God everything is possible, but do they really believe it? And you only find out if you believe it if you are in a hopeless, truly hopeless situation, and you find that you still believe it. Then the question is whether he will believe that for God everything is possible. That is, whether he will have faith. So we get one notion of what it means to have faith, is to really believe that for God everything is possible. Now, you can be in a situation that is an impossible situation, a hopeless situation, and it's important to see that. I mean, you're buried under the tons of rubble, you know? I mean, you're a victim of something horrible, and that is a hopeless situation. I mean, no human being could possibly rescue you. You're lost. To have faith is to really believe in that moment that for God everything is possible. And that's not so easy to believe. And in a way, that's like the whole book. Is it's easy to say we believe that for God everything is possible. It's really hard to actually believe it. And we are a prey to all sorts of phoniness, Kierkegaard is saying, in terms of religion. Then the question is whether he will believe that for God everything is possible. That is, whether he will have faith. But this, having faith, is simply the formula for losing one's mind. To have faith is precisely to lose one's mind so as to win God. You know, I've read that a million times to students, and somebody always gets offended. And I remind them that I'm only reading it. Kierkegaard wrote it, and that Kierkegaard was a Christian. To have faith is to lose one's mind. I mean, isn't he really saying to have faith is to be silly, if not stupid? That is, to really not realize the gravity of the situation, or to be a Pollyanna in a way. Well, to have faith is to believe in the impossible, to believe that there's hope in hopelessness, that anything can really happen, and to have no rational basis for that belief. I think that's the losing one's mind, is to have faith is to abandon reason and common sense and our normal ideas of reality and how it works. But that apparently is what's demanded by faith. Why do we get into these situations that demand faith? He says, let us suppose it goes as follows. A person, shuddering in the grip of a terrified imagination, imagines some horror which for him would be absolutely unendurable. Then it happens. This very horror happens to him. So imagine the worst thing that could possibly happen to you, and then imagine that it actually happened. In human terms, nothing could be more certain than his undoing, and the despair in his soul fights desperately to be allowed to despair, for the peace of mind, if you will, in which to despair, for the consent of his whole being to and in the despair, so that he would curse nothing or nobody more than the attempt, or the one who took it at hand, at preventing him from despairing. Imagine the worst thing you can possibly imagine happening to you happening. How would you respond to that? Well, I think what Kierkegaard is saying is at that moment the natural thing to do is to despair, and to want to despair, to demand the right to despair, so that anyone who got in the way of that despair, anyone who could actually take that despair away, might be met with hostility, with resentment. Who are you? The worst thing that could possibly happen just happened to me, and now you're telling me it'll be all right. Well, how would we respond to someone doing that to us? You know, what Kierkegaard says is, we want to despair. He continues in the top of page 69, salvation then is, humanly speaking, the most impossible thing of all. But for God, everything is possible. This is the struggle of faith. So this form of despair, the despair of necessity lacking possibility, gets us a lot closer to, I think, what Kierkegaard's ultimately up to in this book. Is that form of despair makes us come to terms with our real situation in a way that other forms don't. Forces us to acknowledge our real situation. And for Kierkegaard, what is our real situation? Our real situation is that God is there. And when we are in those situations of impossible hopelessness, they force us to come to terms with who's there. They force us to come to terms with how we really feel about God. And in a way, that's what this book is about. That is, discovering your personhood, discovering your selfhood, being a self, is very much wrapped up with finding out how you really feel about God.